recording now. Today we are going to be talking about getting started with monitoring tools, and the major components of monitoring we'll be looking at is both metrics and logs. We'll have we'll look at different tools, right, that helps us do monitoring across like infrastructure and applications. In the past few weeks, I think we have looked around things like what um, DevOps is and how to build and push applications. I think we have also looked at how to provision infrastructure, right, using Terraform as an infrastructure as code tool, right. Um, I think one thing we can agree on is the fact that a lot of DevOps related duties, you have to use quite some tools, right? Similarly to the way programmers would have to use programming languages, as a DevOps engineer, you have to use certain tools and adopt certain processes. Um, Majorly, we a very good practice and a very good habit, or to have as a DevOps engineer, is to be able to not just deploy and move away from that deployment, but also be able to monitor your infrastructure properly. And that's why we're looking at this, right? We want to ensure that as part of the key takeaways that we have, we're able to also learn some bit of monitoring, right? It's also sometimes called observability, right? And it's one of the duties of the multiple things you do as a DevOps, platform engineer, or even site reliability engineers, right? Monitoring is a critical part. Even as developers, so you need to be able to make sure that your applications are working fine after they are built and deployed. So I'll jump right in straight to talk about the tools, and then we'll do a demo. The first tool we'll be looking at is Grafana, right? So you might have heard of Grafana before. Grafana is mostly a monitoring. It's one of the major monitoring tools that allows you, create visualizations, right? So you're able to create like interactive dashboards that fetch, things like components like metrics, logs, even traces, right? Even things like alerts, right? You can configure all of this on Grafana. Grafana is an open source tool, right? And you can deploy it wherever you like, right? You can have it installed on your local machine. If you want to learn how it works, you can also deploy it on a Kubernetes machine, a normal Ubuntu virtual machine, right? Um, it's been around for a long while and it integrates very well with other tools, right? So some of the tools integrated with are known as data sources, right? They basically are the ones that feed data into Grafana itself, right? So tools like Prometheus is very popular for sending metric data into Grafana. Tools like Loki is also popular for sending log data into Grafana. Um, you have your cloud platforms themselves, like Google Cloud, like Amazon Web Services, AWS, is also known to be able to send information, right, data into Grafana, right? And the whole idea of having these data sent to Grafana is so that you can create dashboards, you can monitor things like performance and a lot of I would say metrics, right? Even costs, right? If you want to know how much you're spending in one of your cloud providers, it's easy for you to send those information from them into Grafana and have dashboards that visualizes them. Um, if you want to build a custom application and send your personal information to Grafana, it's also possible. You just need to make sure that you can send in this data through one of the multiple available data sources that Grafana supports, right? Um, so yeah, that's the basic intro about Grafana. The next tool we'll be looking at is Prometheus, right? So you mostly would not even talk about Grafana and not mention Prometheus, right? They go hand in hand. Prometheus is one of the most popular tool that is used to collect these metrics, right? So Grafana to be the visualization tool where you can see these dashboards and look at and configure so many things. Prometheus, however, works behind the scenes, right? to gather this data from your applications that are deployed and even your cluster itself, right? Your Kubernetes cluster. Prometheus is able to gather all this data, all this information. They're also known as metrics, and send them over to Grafana, right? Or to wherever you want to keep them. You can query Prometheus itself to get the result it has gathered so far, right? You can set up alerting policies based off Prometheus itself. So you can use that to decide on if some of the data you're getting, you want to be able to get some notifications on them, right? Maybe if something bad goes wrong, you want to know, you can do that directly on Prometheus. Prometheus is also an open source tool, right? And it's available to be installed on anywhere. You can install Prometheus on a local PC. You can install it on a virtual machine of any distribution, right? You can also install it on your Kubernetes cluster. Um, and the idea is that a lot of applications that are being built are sending out metrics, right? So you need a tool that can sit just beside them and gather these metrics, right? And then send it somewhere else. And that's the idea behind having Prometheus. There are a lot of alternatives to Prometheus, right? Prometheus can be considered an agent, right? Because all it does is just to sit beside your application or your infrastructure and gather its metrics and send over to a collector, like somewhere where it's being stored and can be queried from there. Prometheus itself can store this data short term, right? Or you can make it long term if you want to. But then you have other guys that can do what Prometheus does, right? And we'll not look at those today, but I could totally just mention a few like open telemetry. You also have I think there's Thanos, right? You also have Grafana agents itself, which would mostly be using today to collect metrics, right? The next is Promptail and Loki. I'm having the Grafana icon here also because you really can't do much with these guys without Grafana, right? You'd still need Grafana to be able to visualize the data they are getting. So they work hand in hand together. You might be able to use um, Loki without necessarily using Promptail, right? But to use you need you need a Loki endpoint whenever you're using Promptail, right? But then you necessarily don't need a Promptail when you have Loki because there are also other agents that can send metrics to Loki. So Promptail is just an agent, like the way we said, instead of Prometheus, you can use things like Thanos or OpenTelemetry. You can also replace Promptail as an agent. But then the major person here is Loki, right? Loki is the most important tool for aggregating logs, for collecting logs together. Promptail sits beside the applications or the clusters, right, and then sends the logs, right? So as developers or even as infrastructure person, you would want to have logs within your system so that you can trace what's happening and see, error messages or information messages or even warning to know when things are going wrong or not, right? Um, when you have those logs being sent, you need an agent to scrape those logs and send them to an endpoint, right, which is Loki in this case. You can switch, you can take other alternatives tools than Promptail to do that. Um, Even from your applications themselves, you can send metrics over to Loki directly, but that's going to be a lot of work, right? So what people do is to you don't have to modify your code base. If you have 50 microservices, you can let them function as they are, and then just have Promptail beside them, scraping the metrics from all of them and sending it over to Loki. So Loki is somewhere up above collecting all the logs, right? And then Loki gives you, a lot of cool stuff. It indexes these logs for you, compresses them. Usually, if you are to be collecting logs one by one, and saving them into an individual file, you might have seen that on Ubuntu there's a file system called I think /var/logs. You'd see multiple files there, right? Loki does this in a bit more smarter way by compressing them together. I think in a GZ format and then sends them somewhere, right? So you can connect. You have to connect Loki to a backend whenever you're installing it, right? The backend can be your S3 buckets, can be a menu bucket, which is very similar to S3. So Loki is mostly for storing logs and querying them. You can query Loki logs, do a search, run some nice queries against them. Hopefully, we'll be able to do a demo of this in a bit. So yeah, Loki also works very similar to Prometheus, right? It has a very similar query language. It's very similar to PromQL, which is the query language for Prometheus, right? Prometheus query language. It also has like its own syntax that used to query logs. And the next would be alert manager and contact points. Um, Typically, when you have a lot of metrics coming in from Prometheus, for example, you have logs coming in from Loki. You want to know sometimes when things are going wrong, right? An example would be that if in your backend application, right, for a banking system, there's a log, right, that um, sort of logs out every failed transaction, right? You can set an alert and say, if the number of failed transactions coming from the application logs for a period of time, say 1 hour, exceeds 50, then you know something is wrong, right? Because 50 people are complaining, right? They can't make bank transfers. So it's best for you to, instead of waiting for your customers to come and tell you that something is wrong, you can set alerting policies and use whatever threshold you want, right? So you can say maybe if you have 50 error messages in 1 hour, send an alert, right? If you have you can also check for metrics, right? So if usually you had a metric that says login success, right, or login failed, that is coming from Prometheus, right? And this can be done by the backend engineers, right? They can just say, if a login works, send this metric as success. If it failed, send this metric as failed to the metric endpoint. Now, Prometheus will be scraping that guy every second or whatever interval you have, and if it says that at some point the number of login failed, right, is getting so high, you can have alerts that says, okay, if login failed in 1 hour is more than 10, then you know that something is wrong, right? It can't be that every person coming in is entering the wrong username and password. It's most likely maybe the login service is broken, right? Or maybe you implemented a new change on your user interface, and somehow the user experience has changed and people are no more using the app as they used to before. So you know that you probably need to like change something. So it's not necessarily meaning that something has failed. It could be that you have a new user experience and you want to monitor that behavior, right? You can use Alert Manager to configure alerts that checks for metrics around those features, and you can use that to alert when something is going wrong or not. Contact point here mostly is where you want those alerts to be sent to, right? Notification channels. So you can send alerts as they trigger into email addresses, Slack messages. There are a lot of platforms that you can connect to your alert manager that can send alert there. You can also receive SMSs if you want to. You can connect to guys like Twilio that will send SMS to you, right? Um, I've mentioned alert so many times. We're not talking about money. So let's move to another slide. So monitoring dashboards, right, and visualizations is mostly what people get to interface with, right? You can say you have an application, and the major thing people want to see in the application is the UI, right? So you can say, yeah, you have a full monitoring stack, but then what people want to see is just the dashboards, right? Um, so you'd mostly want to make sure that you are creating very nice and functional dashboards. You can, spend more than a day, or like this guy here, to create dashboards that are not actually helpful, right? But then it's necessary for you to understand what metrics are you looking for, right? You don't just want to have dashboards that look nice and have like, you're not making PowerPoint presentation when you're making monitoring dashboards, right? It doesn't have to have, your fade out and fade in. It's best to have dashboards that can majorly help you understand what's going on behind the scenes in your systems, right? Um, and you can do this using different ways. Grafana supports, graphs, tables. Sometimes all you need for monitoring something can just be a simple table, right? Like a normal table with headers and rows that tells you when, for example, um, if you want to monitor the number of restarts in a pod, you can totally have a table for that, right? That shows you, okay, this pod in this namespace is failing. It has restarted 20 times, right? You don't have to use a pie chart for that. So it's good to also understand like what type of visualization what visualization type do you want to use for certain metrics, right? For some things. There are times, so it might be tricky, but then it's something that you'd get to learn when you play around setting dashboards and looking at other dashboards that already exist, right? You can see what type of what chart type are people using? Is it a graph? Is it a table? Is it just a normal text, right? That people are using to monitor certain stuff. Um, Grafana also allows you add multiple users. I think the same applies to Prometheus and Promptio. They have something called tenancy that allows you, pull in metrics and logs from multiple places and send them to a single Grafana. Grafana does allow you also create like different user accounts. So we'll be using Grafana Cloud in this case to I've created an account there, but I think any of us can go and create a personal account also. And then we'll take a look at some of these few things now. This is a sneak peek at what metrics looks like. And like we said earlier, right, Prometheus is used to collect metrics across applications, right? And you can easily query them using the Prometheus query language known as PromQL. The metrics are stored to sometimes it's stored locally, but you can also have them stored externally to maybe a remote bucket, right? An S3 bucket. You can have different rules for alerting that works with your Prometheus metrics and says, okay, if this pod is down, then trigger an alert, right? Logs. So when you're collecting logs using, these tools that I've mentioned earlier, especially Loki and Promptio, you have the ability to be able to look at each log line, right? A log is mostly just an entry, right? Says that has certain attributes, things like time, the level of the log. So you might have heard of things like it's a warning, we don't have to worry about it, or it's an error, we need to fix it, right? It's just a normal info, right, that is being logged by the engineers. So there are different levels of logs that you should be familiar with as an engineer or as a DevOps person. You should pay attention to error messages because those are quite critical. Warning can just be maybe a deprecation notice that, okay, well, something is not working well or something might break in future. Info are mostly just intentional logs that the person wants to use to trace stuff later on. You might be you might have written some code in the past where you want to check for something, and what you do is to have an if condition and have a logs with some arrows that helps you identify, okay, that this part is working well or this part is not working well, right? And then when you want to visualize things like that, you can use Grafana to search across the logs for your secret ID that you have just put there, so you can check if things are working well. So it helps you index, it helps you search. You can create dashboards for these logs, right? You can say you want to have a dashboard that shows all the total number of um, error levels, right? So let's say you have 1,000 logs coming in every 1 hour. You want to see how many of those 1,000 logs are the type of error, like an error type of log, right? And that way you know how well the application is performing or not. It's also possible to create log-based alerts, right? Based off like content of your log. So like I just said now, if you want to check for the number of errors coming from your logs, you can create alerts based off that. So yeah, I think I've spoken enough, and I think we can do some demo. You can write down this link, grafana.com/product/cloud. This is a way for you to get started without having to install Grafana on your laptop, right? You can just connect the Grafana agents, which I will be doing. And I have like some sample code that you can copy and use. But please create your own account so that you can get your own API key. So you don't have to overwhelm my free account, and then you can use that to test, sending logs and metrics over to Grafana. So yeah, I'm going to jump into demo now, and we can test some stuff out. Can we see my browser? You can just type on the chat.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Um, so I have a demo application deployed on Cloud Run. I'm sure you might have seen us use Cloud Run in the past, right? So my demo application is this guy, um, and I have it deployed just an hour ago. And I'm sending some logs and metrics from this application over to my monitoring stack, which is on Grafana Cloud. I have a repository which all of us can take a look at. I can send link to the chat for now if anybody just wants to take a look at the repository. And I have two pull requests that are going to interest you. The first one is basically how to scrape metrics from a Kubernetes cluster generally. Um, so I have like my demo cluster. This is my secret key. You should totally change this to yours if you want the metrics to be sent to your own Grafana Cloud account, not mine. Um, and then all of this configuration, I did not write it. I stole it from somewhere. The only thing you need to change is just to change the authentication credentials, right? And the URL. I'll show you where to get all of this from in a bit. So for the metrics, this is how you configure your metrics. You just need a config map, which is like a configuration file for Kubernetes, right? So if you want to scrape an entire Kubernetes cluster, or you need, so there is like I said earlier, you don't necessarily need to install um, some things like Promptail and Loki, because they are alternative tools that do that, but then they can still send this agent can send to a remote Prometheus, and for logs also, which we have here, these logs can be sent to a remote Promptail, right? So you don't, I'm sorry, a remote Loki. You don't have to have like the agents themselves. You can use alternative agents, or there are multiple agents that does the job. But because I want to make this guide very short, I would typically have to have installed Grafana, Promptail, Prometheus, Loki, um, and yeah, all other components that are required on the Kubernetes cluster I want to monitor. But because I want to make this short, I'm sticking to using Grafana Cloud, and I'm using Grafana's agents, right? So Grafana has an agent for scraping metrics, and they have a agent for scraping logs, right? And all you need to do is to make sure that you configure them rightly with your own credentials, put in your cluster name, put in your username and password. The password is an API token that you can generate from the link I sent to the chat earlier. Okay, no, I've not sent it yet. So to create an account, you can, yeah, from the link I showed on the demo. So if you go here, grafana.com/cloud/products, you'll be able to create a free account. I think if I visit it now, you'd see that they have like multiple tiers. Yeah, down here, but you can just try to create a free account, right? So that you can test out these things that we are looking at currently. Um, so when you create an account, you have something like this. They'll tell you that you're on a free cloud account, blah blah blah. You don't have to bother about this because it's you want to just test things out. But then you'd be able to see how nice. So you'll be able to see the number of stuff you're sending in. So I've installed the agent, and you can see currently I'm ingesting, a high amount of logs. I'm sending a total of 87, for approximately it's over 87 megabytes of logs per hour have been sent to Loki. So with my configuration here, that I did right here, I'm able to send logs now to the Loki endpoints or Loki instance that Grafana Cloud has given me. Right, you can deploy your own Loki yourself. Loki has multiple installation methods. You can have Loki installed using even locally. You can install Loki, right? Or using the Helm charts if you are running on Kubernetes. If you're running on Ubuntu, if Ubuntu server, you can have Loki installed using, I think, the package commands. For Prometheus here, which I'm also interested in for sending metrics, I am using their Prometheus, and you can see that I have like some active series of data coming into Prometheus, right, from my agents, which I'm configuring here. So Grafana themselves have an agent that makes it super easy for you to send um, this metrics here whenever. And then Grafana Cloud has multiple services. So Grafana itself is like the tool you use to visualize this guys and these guys, right? Loki for the logs, Promptable for the metrics. Grafana is what you use to set up like dashboards, which we'll do in a bit. There are a lot of other things like configuring alerts, which comes by default. You can, you don't have to configure, you don't have to do much to have alert sets. You have K6 for sending load, I believe, like test, do some load test. You have Tempo, which is quite similar to Prometheus also, and some other tools that I have personally not tested, but you can totally test them out and compare against other things that you have here. So whenever you want to send logs, or metrics, there are guides to do that, right? So the guide I'm following here is the Grafana Cloud official documentation on sending metrics to a remote Grafana Cloud setup using their agent. And before you begin, you'd see the exact same um, changes I had on my pull request earlier. You can copy the same thing, and the only thing you need to change is anywhere you have your, just change it to your personal information, right? So your Prometheus remote, right, which you get, and I'll show you how to get that in a bit. Your Prometheus username and password, and all of this. And then we give you some set of commands to run after, right? So you're supposed to install this in default namespace and also install the agent itself. So the agent itself needs to be installed, right? The same applies for logs. When you are sending logs to Grafana using Grafana agents. When you're sending logs to the Loki on Grafana Cloud using Grafana agent, you need to follow these instructions, right? You need to set your Loki endpoints, your Loki username, your Loki password. Let me show you how to get those information. So after you create an account from here, you'd most likely land on this page, right? Or you can click on my account at any point in time, right? And it brings you here. When you're here, you can click on send metrics, and it's going to take you directly to where you get your credentials. Now, by default, you wouldn't see a password, right? What you need to do is to scroll up and generate a password, or scroll down to where you see generate now. Now, once you click generate now, it's going to generate a password for you, and then you have everything you need. You have the URL, username, which is a number, and your password, which is like a base 64 key. Um, the same thing applies to sending logs, right? So you can just come to Loki, click on send logs, scroll down to where you have generate now, or up rather, and then you can get your keys. And then you can use those guides I shared on the chat to configure um, sending metrics and logs from your clusters. So after some minutes, you'd see that the number of this has even gone up again because it has scraped more logs, and I would most likely get past their free tier um, because I'm sending a lot of information. So I have a tool here called Lens, and I use Lens to mostly visualize Kubernetes, right? You can totally install Lens from you can totally install Lens on your laptop and connect it to your tests Kubernetes clusters. So if you are using clusters like Minikube, right, you can install Lens and visualize what's running within your cluster. So I have Grafana agents, which is running. I have the agents for logs too, and I have Promptable too. I really did not need the agents for logs, so I can delete that. But I'm also using Promptable to send logs directly to Loki. Um, so this is Lens, and I'll share the link on the chat. Lens is mostly a tool to help you manage resources running on your cluster, right? But yeah, that's by the way. So to get to Let's launch Grafana now and try to make some dashboards. So I'm going to click launch on the Grafana UI here. Um, and it has opened up Grafana for me. And then it tells me that I've hit my limit already because I think I'm sending a high amount of logs and metrics to Grafana, right? Which is a good thing because I can test effectively now. So I've sent 26K metrics. Um, Say 0 byte logs. I've sent some logs, but I don't know why this is 0, but we'll test in a bit. So when you're on Grafana, the first thing you need to do is usually to connect your data. But because Grafana Cloud has already connected all data source for you, you don't need to do anything here again. But this just shows you that you can connect, if you want to get logs from, sorry, information from your Linux server, you can connect your Linux server, connect AWS if you're getting from Amazon Web Services. You can connect from OpenTelemetry, Elasticsearch. Basically, Grafana allows you to get data from plenty sources, not just Prometheus or Prompteo, but also even things like GCP and a whole lot others, right? Which you can totally play around on your own. Then you can next go to your data sources to see the data sources that have been configured after you connect them. So we already have Loki for logs and we have Prometheus for metrics, right? I can click on Prometheus here, which is usually the default, and you can see some dashboards, right? Um, I can import some of these dashboards that are already here, right, before creating my own. So I'm going to import the Prometheus status. Let me import this one, and I'm going to click on it. So you see some of the charts I have here have data like this, some do not. And I think what I can do when I'm not sure of what data is coming in is to always use the explore, right? So the explore is like where you'd want to go to most times when you set up a data source and you want to know what information is coming in. So I'll click on explore here. And on this page, the first thing you can do is change your data source. So you can see there are multiple data sources. What I'm interested in first for now is Prometheus. So I'm going to click on Prometheus here, which is the default one. I can change the time I want to check for to, let's say, the last 5 minutes, right? Let's see the metrics, data that's come into this Grafana Cloud setup in the last 5 minutes. And I can drop down this metric, right? If you don't want to drop down because there's a long list of them, you can switch to code and then click metrics browser, which would show you a list of everything, right? And then you can totally make your dashboards based off these guys. Um, I think so we totally can pick one of them. So I can pick maybe, let me go to the container parts, some of the containers. I think I'm looking for a metric I can basically just use now to test. Okay, I see container memory usage. So I can check for the memory usage of one of the containers that we have. I have just one cluster, my demo cluster. If I had multiple clusters, you see all of them here. I can pick a container, right? A particular container. Um, but let me just pick app here, right? As a basic container, and I can run. I can scroll down and say use query, right? And you can see that it's giving me some data, right? If there was some spike somewhere, you would see that one of these will just go up and maybe come back down, right? So maybe the usage at this point has been stable for the last 5 minutes. If I change to 30 minutes and I run the query, it's still the same thing, right? There's been no spike here. So usually you use this to monitor how your action is performing. A very popular dashboard, which I think one of us on this, or a lot of us on this class suggested multiple times, is the dashboard 1000, or is it 10,000? It's a Kubernetes dashboard. I'm going to import that and let's see if some of the metrics we have can give us some data. Usually you can go search Grafana Cloud and get some nice dashboards from there, right? I'm sorry, Grafana dashboards. I'm going to click load here and import this dashboard. But before I do that, I need to select what data source am I connecting to this dashboard, right? Since I know that the metrics for a cluster monitoring on Kubernetes is Prometheus, I've selected that and I'm going to click import. And you can see that we have like a lot of information, right? The Our memory usage on this cluster is 8%. Our CPU usage is 12%, right? When the file system is 13, so we're not using as much. You can see the actual size and what we're using here. Some of them don't have data. Maybe we still need to fix some stuff, but then you can see when you scroll down, you have some information around the network input and output, and you can totally import like other dashboards and play with them. But then this shows you some of the information that you need to know about your cluster. The next thing I'll check on Explore is going to be logs. I'm going to switch from Prometheus to Loki, which is saved as logs. And I'm going to, I can totally, so there are two ways of creating your dashboards. You can use the builder. The builder allows you, select and drop down, select and drop down. Or you can write the query yourself. If you're feeling like a bad guy, you can totally, write using prompt. It's quite similar to PromQL, which I should have shown you, but I'll go back and show you that in a bit. You can totally write the queries yourself, but let's use the builder for now. I'm going to use the builder. I would select a filter. So what I'm looking for, let's pick a namespace. And I'm just going to pick Kotor, and I'm going to run query, right? So basically, I'm getting all the logs for a particular namespace, and you can see that the logs are showing down here. Grafana has like a nice UI, so you can make this JSON better. You can change the logs and select for a particular duration. So let's say the logs in the last 5 minutes, right? In this namespace, and you can see that there's like a small dashboard showing you the volume of logs that are coming in. We can also drop down any of them here to see the information coming from that guy, right? That particular cluster. So you have multiple filters. You can select another filter, right, and drill down till you find the exact logs. A nice thing that we could have done here is to implement search on the dashboard, but that's something you can find. You can find a dashboard that does that also on Grafana Cloud. Um, so if you switch to code here, you would see that there's a query around this thing, right? And this is the low-key query, which is very similar to PromQL, right? It's basically uses the same format as Prometheus query language. It starts with an open braces, and you can put in whatever metric you want there. If I put comma here and I have a space, I can also filter down by a particular container name. Now, because within this namespace, the only containers I have are Envoy and Shutdown Manager. I can filter down to a particular container within that namespace, right? So what I'm saying is you can't find a container name that is in a different namespace, right? After you have selected. If I take away this namespace here and I look for, I just try to, type container name here. It's going to give me a selection. So space, container name. You can see now we have a whole lot more because I'm not filtering by namespace anymore, right? I can now access all the containers within a cluster. So, and when you do that, you can totally go down and see the logs coming from that container you have specified. Yeah. So let's check the Prometheus query behind the dashboard we imported, right? So I think it's in general, and this is it, the cluster monitoring for Kubernetes. So if you want to see the query behind this dashboard, right, you want to see what is actually running this dashboard. There are two things that are very important here. First of all, when you see there is no edit button, you need to go to settings and make it editable so you can begin to see the query, right? I'm going to go back now, there's editable, and you can see there's an edit button here. The first important thing is the query, and the next one is the type of dashboard. Like I said earlier, you don't necessarily need a pie chart to check for things like the ports that are failing, right? If you have a pie chart here, for example, you see it doesn't even make sense because you can't use a pie chart to mostly tell the memory utilization, right? Except if you're comparing against multiple things at the same time. So it's good to know what type of um, visualization type you want to use. Secondly, the important thing is also the query, right? You need to know how to structure your query. So the query here checks for the memory usage and does some computations on them, right? So it's good to also understand how Prometheus query is structured when you want to visualize. Um, I think I'm going to stop here for now, so we can take questions if any. And um, yeah, okay. Do we have any questions? Okay, if we don't have any questions, I probably would show one more thing, which would be nice for us to know about, and I'll send the link on the chat. So usually, when you have um, your Grafana setup, you'd want to copy some dashboard. Like you don't have to build this every dashboard yourself. Now, since I know that I'm monitoring Kubernetes pods, I can search for Kubernetes here and pick one of the nice dashboards that comes out, right? You can see you also have a dashboard for Loki, for logs. Um, I'm looking for something that has to do with Kubernetes pod. So yeah, you can see Kubernetes pod metrics. I'm clicking on this guy and I can just copy this ID here. So I'm going to copy the ID, which is 747. I'll go back to my Grafana and I'll click on import, right? I'll just put this ID here. So I'm going to click load. It has gotten the dashboard data from Grafana um, dashboard lists, right? And I'll select the data source, which is Prometheus, and import. Now you can see that this dashboard has some information about our pods, and it gives us the ability to even filter down the pods, right? You can see that, okay, our pods in total are using up 27% and other information like that. Um, so I'm going to ask the question here, which I'll try to answer with this dashboard. She said the panel that displays no data, what's the fix for them? So most times the fix for them is that the metrics is not coming in, right? If I click, so let's find out why this is not coming in. Pod IP address, if you click edit here and we go to, this is just a text. It's just a text. Let me pick one like this that shows no data and I'm going to click edit. Now this says we are trying to get the container CPU usage. The first thing that you do when I don't see a metric is to open Explore, right? When I don't see a data, is to open Explore. So first of all, I check whether the query this person is writing here, does it make sense to this Grafana instance? That means if I copy this metric, for example, and I come here, I select the same data source, right? And I select the code, right? So I can see the full list. This one, and I load all the metrics. The metric I copied from there was container CPU usage. So what I do is try to filter. I just type it out and see whether it comes out. Um, so we have that metric, right? Which means we should be able to get that data. If I click on it, I look at what filters it has. So it has filters like cluster, container, CPU. So let's go back. Um, so it has things like, here we have things like image not null. That's like the image should not be empty. The name can be anything that starts with Kate. So, but let's look at the metric itself and see what labels it has. So if I pick this guy, let me just pick it again here. I click on it. I can scroll down to use the query. And then while I'm using the query, you can see we have some data here, but we don't have some data here. So now it means that the attributes inside might be wrong. We can now start filtering by the attributes to see what is wrong, right? So if I say if the image is not um yeah, the image is not equals to, the image is not empty, right? So I can run this and you'd say that we have more results, right? So the idea here is that just keep trying to pass in each of them until you find out, which of the attributes here is not getting you that it's not making data show up. Right now it's showing up here, but then you can keep drilling down once you find which one and then maybe fix it. Sometimes it's most likely that the variable is not being passed. So maybe we're not passing this port variable here. That's why it's wrong. So when you something starting with a dollar sign, it's a variable, right? And you can configure that. You can go to the dashboard, click on settings, and come to variables here, and you'd see all of the variables here. Currently, we don't have any variable coming in for pod, and maybe that's why that guy is not working. So I fixed it because there was a metric here that was not supposed to be there, or we don't have that data. That's why we're not getting all the pod information. But now we are. So I can apply this, go back to the dashboard, select one of the pods. I can just pick maybe I go CD, and this also doesn't still have data. Maybe the pod itself is not exposing CPU resources, right? So there are a lot of ways to check, but you just need to keep checking, drilling around until you find out what the solution is. You can pick this container name or this pod name, take it back here to see if you have any data, right, coming in. Then you figure out if the container itself has CPU data or not. So yeah, it's quite fun. But the more fun part is, stealing dashboards that already exist. You can come here and let's steal a dashboard for logs. So I can just say Loki, and I can pick this Loki dashboard. And this is super cool because if you can see the screenshots here, it has search. You can be able to search for certain content. So I'm going to go back to Grafana, click on import, and paste the ID I copied. I'm going to load it. In this case, my data source is not Prometheus, right? It's Loki, which is logs. So I'm going to just import this dashboard. And you can see that automatically dashboard is already working for me. If I pick a particular pod, right, say, and just search for things like error, there are definitely errors. That's why you can see that a lot of them are now showing up, right? So these are the logs that has errors. I can change this to maybe hello. I don't think there's any log that has hello, so you can see there's nothing showing up. But when you use reasonable content that you believe should be in your pod, you would get some content back. So yeah, this is how Loki works, and Loki can scrape logs from the entire cluster, and you can search for them using this format here. If you want to check how this is working behind the scenes, you can go to settings, make the dashboard editable, save it, go back to the dashboard, and okay, we've opened the dashboard. Okay, we have to pick a pod. So you can edit it and see that the search content that's being passed is, so this is the query behind that particular dashboard, right? So here, the app is known as, the value we selected here is what's supplied to this dollar sign app. Whatever you enter here, if I say MSG message or I pass error, is what's being passed to this place here. So there is no log that has error, but I can see that there are some that has info. So I type info back, you can see that they're going to come back. So yeah, that's how to set up visualization, make dashboards for your metrics and your logs, and also like steal dashboards from the Grafana Labs dashboard, multiple dashboards, right? If you are feeling good, you can submit some dashboards here too and have people use some of your dashboards. Okay, so I'm going to stop right on time, and thank you everyone. If you have other questions, you can ask on the WhatsApp group.